This is the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast with your hosts Chris Spear and Andrew Wilkinson. Each week, we'll be speaking with food entrepreneurs and people in the culinary industry. If you're interested in learning more about our organization dedicated to helping people build and grow their food businesses, look us up on the web at chefswithoutrestaurants.com and .org and on Facebook and Instagram at Chefs Without Restaurants. Now, enjoy the show. This is episode 31 of the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. On this episode, we have Mark Vierthaler. Mark is the head distiller at 10th Ward Distilling Company in Frederick, Maryland. On this episode, support and collaboration within the craft spirits community, an in-depth look at how the spirits world operates, and the history of absinthe and Maryland rye. This episode was recorded prior to the spread of COVID-19. Because of the current situation, 10th Ward founder Monica Pierce has decided to begin producing both hand sanitizer and surface disinfectant. We just wanted to take a moment to say thank you to both Monica and Mark for their dedication to their community during this tough time. And thank you to this week's sponsors, Tyler Wright, Little Fig Bake Shop in Baltimore, Maryland, and Cafe Bueno in Frederick, Maryland. Thanks so much for the support. And no hard sell here, but if you want to support the show, our Venmo name is CHEFSWORESTOS. If you enjoy the show, have ever received a job through one of our referrals, have been a guest, been given complimentary Chefs Without Restaurants swag, or simply want to help, it would be much appreciated. Feel free to let us know if you have any questions. Thanks for listening, and have a great week.
Welcome to the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. Obviously, I'm Andrew, and today we're here with Mark Vierthaler.
Yes.
Of 10th Ward Distilling Company.
Hey, hey.
And we have with us today some Kinklings gifted by Clustered Spires Pastry Shop. As usual, we're at Jugbridge Brewery. Shout out to them for hosting us. And Mark has a little pre-podcast ritual that he wanted to share with us, so we're going to go ahead and do that, and he's going to explain it a little bit.
Yeah, so unfortunately, since podcasts are an oral medium and not a visual, to really set the stage, we have two glasses in front of us. One of them is filled to the brim with our Jennifer-style gin that we make here at 10th Ward, and the other is filled to the brim with
Coal Miner,
Scottish Ale,
Coal Miner Scottish Ale.
The Coal Miner Scottish Ale from right here at Jugbridge. And so what we're going to do is what we call the Kopfstoot, which is a headbutt. So I got into the habit of doing this because it's a great icebreaker, plus lets you see how well good local products pair together. The Kopfstoot is the traditional way of drinking. Jennifer, what you do is you fill your glass all the way up to the very tippy top with Jennifer, almost so you can't fit any more in it. Then you have to sip off of the top of that without using your hands. Then you're not shooting it. You're just sipping off of the top. Once you've done that, you take a drink of your beer, and then you're going to sit back and you're going to relax, and you're going to drink the two of these together interchangeably. It's kind of like a fancy version of a Boilermaker. The reason it's served to the top, because of course you want to make sure you get every single ounce of booze that you practically can. And again, it's just a fun way, and it's called the headbutt because of course you've got to lean down face first to take the sip. So we're going to go ahead and do that starting out. So arms behind your back, guys.
Kopfstoot.
Kopfstoot.
All right, so but then I can pick up the beer, or do
yes,
I? Okay.
Yes, you can pick up the beer. So you're just slurping off the top of the Jennifer.
One more question: when I do sip the Jennifer, do I keep it in my mouth or do I drink it?
So go ahead and drink it.
Okay. All right.
So here we go. Perfect. Then I'm going to take our beer. Cheers. We're going to take a little sip. And then what you're going to notice is how well those two flavor profiles start to play together.
Yeah.
So,
whoa,
gentlemen, welcome. I'm glad to have shared a Kopfstoot with you.
Welcome to the podcast, and
Thank
you for the Kopfstoot.
My pleasure.
Here goes Chris.
Chris, yep.
And then you just kind of like sip
and
on both.
And then you'll just sip on your Jennifer. We'll sipping on your beer. And it's just such a simple way to enjoy two very different products. I would encourage anybody who's interested in doing this, pair it, mix and match it with your favorite local beers. As I was telling these guys before we started recording, I love to bring another local brewery's product with me when we do the Kopfstoot. But since we are recording right here at Jugbridge, it seemed perfect to do it. And this The Scottish ale is an absolutely perfect accoutrement to some of the heavier citrus and kind of jammy notes of the Genever.
It is. And it's like the gin kind of brings out, I don't know if it's like bringing the malt forward or like, it's like a super crazy taste, but it's really good. And I'm not getting it when I just drink the beer.
Mm-hmm. And to me, like that maltiness and, even those lighter hops from the beer itself, you're going to notice that juniper comes a lot more forward in the gin as well. Whereas if you drink that Genever style gin by itself, it's a little bit more of a juniper backwards gin. But yeah, with the advantage, the Genever is a rye whiskey base. So essentially we are making a gin out of a white whiskey. So it also complements with those heavier, maltier notes.
Where does it make sense to start your story as far as, like distilling goes? Like where?
Well, way back when, as I was telling Chris, I've actually... For distillers, I share a very similar pathway in that it was very circuitous. I think you can talk to a lot of brewery owners and brewers where, I started out homebrewing, or I started out with this introduction to craft beer and went from there. And because it's illegal to actually distill in your home anywhere in the United States, it's surprising to see the varied backgrounds that distillers come from. For me, a whole other lifetime ago, I was actually an investigative journalist. My degree from school is a Bachelor of Science in Journalism from the University of Kansas. And I did investigative journalism, specifically focusing on crime and cops, as well as local government. And then mid-2000s, you saw kind of the crash of the journalism industry. You saw people cutting funds. It tended to be features reporters and investigative reporters who were the first to go. Investigative reporters, because you cost a lot of money, you take a lot of time to write your story, and you also tend to really piss off advertisers. So in a time where advertising money was what was keeping the lights on, we weren't super popular. So I ended up actually going back to my hometown of Dodge City, Kansas, to take over the daily newspaper there. It was a huge opportunity for a young guy out of college. Fortunately, ended up essentially working about 8 a.m. to 2 a.m. 7 days a week. I had just gotten married, didn't see my wife, didn't see my kid. So did a lot of what reporters do, left journalism, got into public relations and marketing. Did PR for a national ag company for about 7 years. Paid well, just wasn't a lot of job satisfaction. It was mostly just traveling around and, being a schmoozer. But through being an investigative journalist, through being a person in PR, I always had an obsession with craft cocktails and craft spirits. I can actually give my oldest brother, Luke, credit for that. He handed me, when I was in high school, a Michael Jackson guide to both beer and whiskeys. So that kind of really got me into it. He bought the PDT cocktail book, and I stole that from him several times. So even before the cocktail renaissance had really begun in earnest countrywide, my brother was kind of exposing me to what was going on the coasts. And, it didn't have to be sneaking shots of Jack in high school. There was this whole other world out there. And so I ended up doing a lot of freelance cocktail and spirit writing. My wife and I ended up taking over a bar program in Dodge City, Kansas. Let's tell people to put it in perspective. Dodge City is a town of about 35,000 people, western plains of Kansas, and we were the city. The closest city was about 500,000 people, but that was 2.5 hours away. So we spent a couple of years developing a craft cocktail program and kind of priming the community for this same idea that it doesn't have to be Jack and Cokes. It doesn't have to be sex on the beach. It can be these amazingly well-crafted cocktails utilizing local ingredients. So while I was doing that, I ended up, there was some farmers that decided that they wanted to get together and open a distillery in Dodge City. And they knew me through my work in agriculture and also knew that I did freelance spirits and cocktail stuff. And so one day I got a text from one of the owners and he was like, "Hey, I know you're interested. Do you have any interest in coming in and being an advisor? You come in, you taste our spirits, you go, yeah, this sucks, or no, this is really good." And I was like, yeah, of course. And I think about 2 weeks later, they posted an ad online for a part-time assistant distiller and a part-time events manager. And I really wasn't very happy at the job that I was at. And so I called him and I said, "Hey, I have a proposal for you. Can I come in?"
Full-time as both.
And I said, exactly. I said, "I have marketing experience. I have zero distilling experience, but how about bringing me on full time and I become your director of marketing and I become your assistant distiller? And he said, sure. And so I came in, we talked for like 3-4 hours. And the next day I turned in my resignation and learned how to distill.
So that kind of is a great segue into the question that I've been brewing over here. So did your background in investigative journalism help with jumping into distilling? Whereas you know how to research and you know how to get the information you need to, get to the bottom of things.
I genuinely think that it does. Again, kind of talk about like one of the challenges of coming into the craft distilling space is unless you were distilling illegally or you happen to have a contact somewhere in a licensed distillery, a lot of it is self-taught and visiting other people and figuring out how to do things. And I think having that idea of walking into something with almost zero knowledge. And I say that because I walked in cocky because, having been a freelance spirits and cocktail writer for almost a decade, I was like, oh yeah, no, I know how booze is made. I know fermentation. I know the difference between knowing it intellectually and actually physically doing it are two massively different things.
Yeah.
And so immediately, you do the first thing. You go, okay, who are the leaders in this industry? Who are the people that, if I can convince them to give me time, are going to be able to give me good advice? And I will admit, like my very first time going in, I think I probably had a ton of eye rolls, like talking to these people, because they'd be like, well, okay, do you have a specific fermentation question or a specific question about cuts or blending? I'm like, no, just how do you do it? Like, is this okay? How is this allowed? And I was lucky enough that first distillery, they were also learning as well. Mm-hmm. And so they gave me the room to talk to these people, get educated, visit other distilleries, fuck up, and then go back and make it correctly. And there wasn't kind of this sense of we are an established distillery, and so
don't fuck up.
Exactly. You're walking in and you should know how to do this already.
Yeah.
So that was massively helpful. And one thing I learned as an investigative reporter was times when to pretend like you know what you're doing and times when to throw your hands up and go, I am absolutely clueless on this. And knowing when to rely on people that have a knowledge base that you don't. And that has been a massive help as well, is not being afraid to admit, looking at something and going, yeah, I am at a complete loss for words right now, but I know who can help me. And that's one of the amazing things about not just craft distilling, but craft beverages in general, is there is this absolutely amazing sense of community and sense of partnership and support and growth. That was one of the things that I really didn't like about public relations. And even to an extent, being a journalist, there was this sense of cutthroat that I have to be the best and I have to undermine everyone else. It's not enough that I succeed, others must fail. And naturally, while I'm a competitive person, that's not me. I'm not a cutthroat guy. I like to see everyone succeed. And so the fact that I knew that I could go to other distillers that in theory are in competition with the distillery that I was at and go, hey, I'm really having this issue with the fermentation. It keeps getting infected. It's not finishing. What's going on? And I knew I could trust the information that I got. Has been absolutely amazing. And I'm a firm believer in that too, which is one of the reasons I stay so involved. Like, I'm involved with the Maryland Craft Distillers Guild on their education committee. I'm on 3 different advisory committees for the American Craft Spirits Association. And it's been awesome because Monica Pierce, the founder and owner of 10th Ward, has really embraced that as well. And she's a big believer in like the high tide raises all ships.
Yeah. There's some parallels there with the pizza world, which I'm in, for listeners that don't know, where, it used to be like you hide your tomato cans in the trash so that like people don't know what you're using. But now it's kind of like everybody's helping each other and sharing knowledge and just like putting their ideas out there and not really, there's still people that are hiding stuff, but, and it's whatever. If they want to do that, they can, but there's just a lot of support.
I think of what, I think something Chris had mentioned in one of the earlier episodes of this podcast actually was coming into that idea of the chefs that, the chefs that would hide every single recipe, and even the crew and the staff didn't know it. And then there were people like Dave Arnold who came in with and I've been lucky enough to know Dave, and
I would say I wouldn't have my business if it wasn't for Dave. I went and took a course with him 9 years ago. And also that ignited my passion for cocktails, because obviously Dave's a cocktail guy. I had never been to New York City, and I went up for a 2-day workshop at FCI with him and Nils Noren to learn molecular gastronomy. Mm-hmm. But Dave's also a huge cocktail guy. And he's like, oh, if you're in the city for 2 days, this is where you need to go. And I got super into cocktails, and it's 100% because of Dave Arnold, 8 years ago. But when I went and met him, I didn't have a website, I didn't have a blog, I wasn't on Twitter, I didn't know anyone. And I've said to this day, I don't know that I would have Perfect Little Bites or Chefs Without Restaurants without Dave Arnold. So Dave has been phenomenal and huge. And then, the first 3 years of Cooking Issues, I think I sent him a question every single week on his radio show, and he answered so many of them, and he's been a great resource. So I've known Dave for a long time, and I attribute so much of my success to Dave.
I was lucky enough to have drinks with Dave in New Orleans during Tales of the Cocktail. And I also, whenever people ask me, hey, I want to get into bartending, I will always point them to his book because that basically taught me to be a bartender. He breaks down, the science of dilution, and after you've mixed this cocktail X amount of times, you're no longer achieving any more mixing. You're just over diluting, and here's the exact right amount of time to shake. And he has the graphs to prove it. And if people haven't listened to Cooking Issues, I cannot recommend it enough. It's on one of my go-tos. But so kind of that idea of we have nothing to hide, and it helps all of us when one of us gets helped. And this isn't to throw shade on people within the craft distilling industry, but if you look at the growth of the industry over the past couple years, I want to say about 10 years ago, there were maybe 30, 40 craft distilleries. And then the last number that was released was there's a little over 2,000 craft distilleries in the United States now. I mean, that is exponential growth. And because of that lack of experience hands-on with distilling, unfortunately, there's a lot of really bad spirits out there. And that's not through any fault or personal failing of the people who own the distilleries. It's just you don't have the education. You didn't have that knowledge base. And so if we as distillers are able to reach out to these up-and-comers, it behooves us, all of us, to help them grow and excel, because we want people to realize that the craft spirits movement is just as valid as the craft beer movement. And that, there are some amazing spirits coming from the big houses out there, but we want to make sure there's amazing spirits coming from the small houses too. And by being able to have that support network and support those who are coming into it, that just benefits us as a whole.
Yeah, I think local isn't always better. We talk support local. It's that's great, but there's a lot of small and local, and I'm not talking about Frederick, but just in general, to your point, you have someone like Jim Beam who's been making a product forever, and it's easy to dog on them, but it's they kind of have it down.
Oh, yeah.
And it's consistent. And then you go to a lot of these distilleries where they're making these one-off spirits, and you're it's not that good, and it's not cheap. Right. Because they're small, they have higher costs, so you're maybe paying $50 a bottle for whiskey, and it's it's not really that good.
Well, and that was one of the big challenges that you see in general of craft spirits trying to get into the space is, with the craft beer thing, it made a lot of sense because you had these massive brands that were producing not great quality beer. They were ignoring things like Belgian triples and stouts and sours and anything else that may have been part of this greater history of beer production. But in terms of craft spirits, they're the major conglomerations. There's the big houses out there, but they make really good shit. It wasn't like we were stepping in to fulfill a lack of high quality spirits. It was kind of this idea of, maybe we can define this idea of terroir within spirits, and we can create something that is uniquely Maryland or uniquely Frederick, or, you can create a brand that evokes a sense of time and place, but we don't have that addition of, well, yeah, this is crap, so I'm not going to drink it, so I need to look to the local guys. And yeah, it's economies of scale. The smaller you are, the more expensive it is. And so that's why we're big believers in, before it ever goes into a bottle and we put our label on it, it needs to be high quality. And so if we can do what we can to help newcomers into that space, then that's what you can do. And I don't know many other industries like that. Again, like journalism and PR was, you had trade groups, but anytime you actually would try to, pressure people like, oh, cool, you had this amazing campaign that worked really well. How did you implement it? And you get kind of these cagey answers of, well, this is what we were looking at. And whereas with now, I can reach out to almost anybody and be like, and there's some things you do keep close to your pocket. Where do you source stuff from, or what's your specific levels and things? But I can also reach out to Todd Leopold of Leopold Brothers in California and be like, hey, I have this stock rye fermentation. Why is it doing this? And he, within 30 minutes, shoots me a text and is like, well, have you tried this, or this?
Yeah, I mean, I've often said that Chefs Without Restaurants, I wanted to create the community that I didn't feel existed here in Frederick, but I think it definitely exists in the context of craft spirits and brewing. Mm-hmm. As an outsider, it kind of seemed like you guys all got along, helped each other out, did collabs in a way that chefs and restaurants weren't doing. And that's kind of what I wanted to do, is create this network of chefs who we can help each other out. We can share gigs with each other. We can do collaborative events together. And the restaurants weren't really doing that here, but it did seem like the beverage industry locally was doing that.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of the reasons I was attracted to Frederick in general. One, I can tell you, Maryland as a state, as a whole, has the most active distillers guild I have ever seen. Like, not every state has a distillers guild, but it's kind of the same idea as, these like national trade groups like ACSA is, we're looking to find like-minded people, share information, and support each other. Maryland has a massive guild, and everyone is super involved with it. And that's been encouraging. But then even in the local Frederick level, the idea that, again, when all of us succeed, we all succeed more. I hate to go back to that adage of the high tide and raise all ships, but there's kind of that same idea. We work closely with McClintock here in town, which is another distillery. We've shared barrels, and we've talked about, like, they just released something that was aged in one of our apple brandy barrels that was one of their products. Working really close one-on-one with the local breweries. We will do barrel exchanges where they'll take one of our bourbon or rye or apple brandy barrels and finish it. And then we will come back and we will finish something again in that. Orchid Cellar, like, we're lucky enough that there is a meadery.
One of the best, too.
Yeah, they're amazing. Like,
so good.
Yeah, Andre and his father and like the whole staff is just brilliant. So if you haven't been to Orchid Cellar, go. It is, one, in a gorgeous location, and two, the products are amazing. It's the best meat I've had in my life, honestly. But we get their kind of leftovers of cloudy mead and things that didn't go into the bottle, and then we distill that and we age it. And
Yum.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah. And so we call it our Conspirator series, because anytime we can find a chance to work hand in hand with local spirit, it's awesome. Because the other thing that's cool about Frederick is, as many of us as there are, distilleries, breweries, vineyards, everyone is doing something different, and everyone is finding their own unique foothold. And then, again, like, going back to people who know things better than I do, that's a great way to take advantage of their expertise to create something unique for our brand as well.
Yeah, I have a bunch of, I collect spirits. So I have 2 different runs of the Honey Jack, I think. And I actually still have some of the Adamaro Boy, which which predates your distilling at 10th Ward.
That's before I was there.
It was a collaboration with some beer that didn't turn out so well from Attaboy. So it was distilled into an Amaro. And it's definitely a unique thing. So I keep it on hand for friends who come over and want to try something different. But have two different runs of the Honey Jack at home right now as well, which was the collab with Orchid Cellar.
That's awesome. And one thing that we love doing is, if somebody, and we kind of have a standing agreement with all of the breweries within Frederick that should something happen to one of their kegs, something goes off, you just didn't move it as fast as you wanted, you decided you didn't like it, we will take those kegs off their hands, and then we're distilling it right now into one big batch, which internally we've been calling it a rainbow barrel, because we can't call it whiskey. I mean, we can't call it bourbon. We can't call it rye. It is just, here's a bunch of random stuff. And so once we have enough, we're going to take about 30 different styles of beer that have been distilled together and toss it in a barrel and see what happens.
That is wild. So basically you're by distilling a beer that didn't turn out, you're just taking the alcohol content out of it?
Right. So
I guess that's...
Yeah, more or less. I mean, so basically distillation is just an idea of concentration.
Right.
So if we're making whiskeys, the first thing that we do internally at 10th Ward is we make a beer. Whether that's a corn-based beer or rye-based beer then determines if that's bourbon or rye whiskey. So our first step is always making a beer. That then gets distilled out into a new make spirit. So if people have beer that has gone off, we can distill that out. Now, I always tell people the thing to keep in mind is we also have to worry about the quality of the fermentation and distillation as well. I had a mentor who is an advisor for yeast production out in California in the Napa area, who once told me a lot of distillers miss the fact that if you screw up your fermentation, you're not going to have a good end product. Because again, what we're doing is we're concentrating it. And so if it's the shit in, shit out. If we put a terrible fermentation in and we distill it out, really all we're doing is condensing a lot of those really inappropriate flavors and infections and things that we don't want in there. But you can distill it up to a neutral, which we don't have the ability to do because you have to have a specific still setup to do that. But if you distill it up to neutral, basically what you're doing is you are getting it to 95% alcohol. And then you can filter that and clean it up and use it as a blender. So
how does that work with beer that didn't turn out quite right? I mean, because you say that you're basically concentrating those flavors that are already in the beer. So if the flavor in the beer is not right and you're going to distill and concentrate that, how do you make that work?
So
especially with a blend of a bunch of them.
Right. Well, so that's the magic of barrels.
Okay.
So barrel aging does a couple of things. I always say it does three main things. It works as a coloring agent, it works as a flavoring agent, but it also works as a filtration agent. Because you have that charcoal-like char inside of the barrel, charcoal is one of the most efficient filters that you can possibly have. And the other cool thing, and we could do this big, massive, nerdy deep dive into barrel aging, is when we produce a new make spirit with the intention of it going into a barrel, you actually introduce some flaws into it. And the reason you do that is because what is a flaw on a natural, what's coming right off of the still, will evolve into something pleasant as it ages on oak. Again, for a couple of reasons. One, because that wood works as a filtration. Sometimes it's gonna bond with the lignins and tannins that are in that barrel. But also, you have an oxidation of the spirit itself, and you will see an actual chemical change in some of those more unpleasant flavors over time in a barrel. Now, then you do also run that extra danger, though, that it could turn out that oak doesn't help. Right. So those are some inherent risks in taking it. But that's why the idea that if you can distill it up to a neutral, you can still find some way to use it, and you're doing as much as you can to strip away those unpleasant flavors that appear in that flawed fermentation.
Wow. That's really awesome. Mark poured some absinthe.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about this?
Yeah, most definitely. Like Andrew had said, while we were over break, we'd finished up our Kopfstut, so it was time to move on to the next round. Poured them a lushed version of our Absinthe Nouvelle that we make here at 10th Ward. So it's kind of telling them a little bit about during the break. It is actually a traditional French-style absinthe, which means that we do utilize what we call the Holy Trinity, and that is green anise, fennel seed, and grand wormwood. So one of the biggest arguments we have when people come in is, they're like, oh, no, bullshit, that's not real absinthe. It is 100% real, honest to goodness absinthe made right here in Frederick. With ours, we always kind of like to say that at 10th Ward, our goal is to ward off ordinary. And so kind of like what we do with a lot of our other products, we like to dig into the history of it, figure out the people who came before us, who knew what they were doing and why they made it specific ways, and then try to create something unique and is its own product that stands on its own. So what you have is the Absinthe Nouvelle. So we utilize that traditional production, but we do also add chrysanthemum and bergamot peel, as well as a couple of other botanicals that makes it a little bit lighter, a little bit more floral, a little bit of citrus. I always tell people that this is a really good non-absinthe drinker's absinthe, mostly because the black licorice flavor that you get from the anise and the fennel isn't as pronounced. You're going to have a little bit more nuance. It's not going to be as hot and as aggressive. So this is a great, after we've had some coffee, after we've had the Kinkles, it has been just a really nice kind of aperitif to help us with the digestion. And now it's after 11, so I feel it's a little more acceptable for us to be drinking some absinthe.
Definitely. This is my first time trying it, so.
Well, excellent. Well, I hope you enjoy it.
I do actually really enjoy it. So what is it that people want to call it, like say that it's not real for? Why do they say that?
So for a long time, it was actually illegal in the U.S. And actually in Switzerland and in France for, decades and decades. Really, if you wanted to get your hands on true, honest-to-goodness absinthe, you had to go to the U.K. And it's kind of it has this, mystique about it, this, all this storytelling that's been built up around absinthe. And, of course, the popular myth was that it caused hallucinations, claimed that it's what caused Van Gogh to slice his ear off. Really, all of that was essentially just a bunch of bullshit marketing by the powers that be in France at the time, as well as wine producers, because it was associated with bohemians, hippies of their day. Plus, it was starting to overtake wine in sales in France. And so it's easy to blame absinthe. So it got banned. Got banned in the U.S., of course, during Prohibition, and then never really got legalized actually until 2007. 2007, it's kind of interesting. It technically was always legal. The illegal thing was the U.S. said you could not produce a spirit that contained over a particular parts per million of thujone. Thujone is produced by the grand wormwood. It was thought for a while that thujone was psychotropic, but it turns out no, it's just mildly carcinogenic. And if you are producing absinthe in a traditional French style, there's pretty much no way you're going to get enough thujone into that final product. So 2007, they finally lifted the ban. And so, some people still think it's illegal. Some people still think it has to be made in Europe. But no, none of those things are true. So this is a true, honest-to-God absinthe.
And it doesn't make you hallucinate.
It does not make you hallucinate. It's kind of interesting, like that myth of thujone being hallucinogenic was perpetuated as we moved into like the 50s, 60s, and 70s, because as you started to break down the chemical makeup of thujone, it is very close to THC. If you look at THC next to thujone, they are very similar, and so a lot of scientists said, well, that's proof. The thing is, thujone doesn't bond to anything within your brain, so it basically passes through your system without causing any sort of issue. So I always tell people, there were people who were hallucinating when they were drinking absinthe, but they were also taking morphine and opium, and I'm probably going to lean it a little more on those than alcohol.
Maybe the combination. Do you think there's anything distinctly unique about the effects of absinthe, or is it just another spirit? Basically?
It's just another spirit. Truthfully, you can get sometimes you can get a numbing effect in your mouth, but that depends on how much star anise you use, and you can kind of look that to the basic molecular bondings of flavor in general. Probably the thing that I always warn people most about is in the bottle, it's super high ABV. So you don't want to drink it neat. right out of the bottle. For our example, it's 140 proof, so 70% ABV. But we added the water into it to create La Louche. We do that for a couple of reasons. One is to bring that proof down so it's much more enjoyable, but also the addition of that water starts to break apart some of those more volatile oil bonds. You start to see the heavier oils precipitate, which is what causes the cloudiness, and it also opens up those softer, more floral flavors. You can drink it out of the bottle. Just be aware it is 70% ABV. It's mostly booze. And to me, you lose a lot of the wonderful nuances in it because really, at that point, you're mostly tasting the ethanol, which is hot and not much else.
Yeah. Cool. So I think we touched on it a little bit. Chris wanted to talk about collaboration in the craft beverage industry. Is there any specific questions or anything you wanted to touch on with that?
Not necessarily, but just like how does that come about? Do you think it just existed, like everyone was really cool in Frederick and they all thought it would be a good idea to collaborate? Like how does that happen where you're either really collaborative or you're not?
And granted, this is 0% science, 100% me pulling this out of my ass because it seems to be what I've observed. So this is not quantitative, but rather qualitative. But I feel like to get into the craft space, it takes a specific type of person. I think the people that tend to be drawn to making craft spirits, to making craft beer, tend to be a little bit more artistic as well as scientific. And to me, a key part of artistry is collaboration. It is, it's that old, the sincerest form of flattery is plagiarism. But I think there's a lot to be said for healthy plagiarism in craft production because you can look at what other people are doing and you can see what they're doing and you can adjust to it. And I think the industries tend to draw people in that are a little bit more willing to be open about that. And it's also been my experience that people within these industries also tend to realize that I could give you, like I could give Andrew or Chris, my exact recipe. I could tell you how much water I use, what type of water I use, the types of grains, the types of yeasts. I could give you my pitch rate, my fermentation time, and my distillation procedure. And if you have a different still, if you have different fermenters, you're in a different location, it is not going to taste a single thing like what I made. There are so many environmental factors that impact that final product that I think most people tend to realize that there is no harm in sharing as long as you're judicious about it. I mean, again, like we will always list every single botanical that we put into a product because it impacts the flavor and we're proud of how each one of those interacts, but we may not give you proportions. Or if someone calls in and asks a question about absinthe and they're like, well, I'm having an issue with the louche on it, we can go, well, what are your pitch rates for these 3 particular ingredients that are going to affect the louche? And I don't know. I think more and more, there's a lot of disadvantages to social media. I mean, at this point, again, I've become crotchety enough. I think a lot of the disadvantages outweigh the advantages, but one of the advantages is kind of this idea of sharing and understanding that we are part of a bigger community, and that understanding that if I'm good at what I do and my quote unquote competition is good at what they do, then that helps both of us because then people can look at Maryland or Frederick and go, holy shit, these guys know what they're doing. Like you think of like in terms of like, well, people in general look at Napa and Sonoma as the places that these really brilliant California wines are coming out of. If you have that ability to share and that willingness to share, I think that helps everybody in general. And I see a lot of people who realize that. And again, that's not to say it's an across-the-board thing. Unfortunately, just like with any other business, any other group, you're going to have people who are assholes about stuff. And it's a shame that happens. You don't want to see that, but that's what happens. I was told once when I was at a previous distillery that someone was producing something that we also made. I reached out and was like, hey, do you have a little bit of time that we can talk about production? And he goes, fuck you. I have zero interest in sharing and I said, well, why not? And he goes, well, because you're my competition and I cannot benefit you in any other way. And so it's just like, okay, cool. The next time you have an issue that I can answer, good luck getting me to answer it, because I'm not going to.
Yeah, that's disappointing, I think. But, to each their own. I guess you have to figure out what your path is on your own business. What's the existing cocktail knowledge of the general public in Frederick? Like, when you have people come in, have people had absinthe? Have people had cocktails that you're doing? What do you find that kind of make up percentages?
I've been genuinely impressed, truthfully, since we came to Frederick. I'd be lying if I didn't say that we will occasionally get people who come in and be like, well, how come I can't get a $2 shot of Jack? Or, I just want Miller Lite. Why isn't there any Miller Lite? But thankfully, those are few and far between. I think Frederick is lucky because, especially within the past couple of years, you have seen other bars and restaurants that have stepped into the craft space and have started to kind of, I think, train a lot of people in Frederick to be more open to more exotic spirits and to more complex, elevated cocktails, as opposed to, again, kind of the beer and shot type of bar. I mean, you look at people like Volt and Hooch and Banter and White Rabbit, and I know, like, it's taken them some time, but you can go into any one of those places and you will see people drinking these absolutely brilliant cocktails. And so I feel like they kind of did a lot of the heavy lifting for us when we opened our cocktail lab last year, that we weren't going into a vacuum of the craft cocktail movement here within Frederick. And I don't mean to throw the accent in there to play into the stereotype of the Fredneck. That is just my general dismissive accent for people who come in and just want a shot and a cheap beer. But I've also been impressed by the number of people who may not have had experience with, say, absinthe or a Genever style gin or more elevated cocktails, but they are willing to experiment. And I feel like that's key in it. And that's what has to take place is, like when my son was growing up, like, he's a very adventurous eater now. And I think part of that was my wife and I always pushed him. Try it once. If you don't like it, you don't have to like it. That's cool. Like, not liking something is perfectly fine, but you have to give it that chance. And that's kind of the attitude we've taken within the cocktail lab at 10th Ward. And again, us making more esoteric spirits has been a community that has been really willing to step out of their comfort zone and try something and have that ability to go, wow, that was amazing. Or conversely, wow, I'm never going to drink that again.
What's the worst that's going to happen? Like, you can get another cocktail in 5 minutes.
Exactly. And that's exactly it. Is, we just want you to experiment. We want to open your eyes to something new. And if you don't like it, that's totally cool. But to also live in an area that has that variety, I think, is a huge thing as well. That our place, our spirits may not be for you, but there are plenty of other places around that are going to meet your demands and meet your needs, and vice versa. If there's people who don't want to go to the sports bar and just don't want to hammer down BLs, cool, you've got options.
So what are you excited about in the cocktail world in general right now, or either at 10th Ward? Like, what has you super excited?
Well, kind of going back to what we had talked about earlier with the, we all say support local, but sometimes local isn't very good. Seeing the increase in that focus on quality and not just leaning on the local idea. And honestly, one thing that makes me happy to see is people kind of going back to the idea that a cocktail can be complex, it can be nuanced, it can be layered, but you don't have to disappear up your own ass about it. I always remind our bar staff, yes, it's important that you get this right. It's important for consistency. Excuse me. But at the end of the day, we're serving cocktails. We're not brain surgeons. We want people to come in to enjoy themselves, to have fun, and to have an amazing flavor experience. And to me, I'm excited to see more of a return to that you can still create something that is memorable, but as long as people are leaving smiling and they enjoyed it and it tasted good, that's what we're looking at, and not complexity for complexity's sake. There's been an increase in books like the 3-ingredient cocktails, and that's what makes me excited. Is we want people to come in, we want to enjoy an amazing cocktail, we want them to purchase the spirits, but we also want them to be able to mix that at home. And so I think as you see more people realizing that creating a delicious cocktail with high quality local ingredients, with stuff that's easy to source, that's going to create a lifelong partnership, both with other local producers and your customers. And so that makes me happy to see that, and to see that idea that, I don't know, again, just accessibility. And yeah, we're doing stuff that's complex and maybe off the wall, but just because it's like that doesn't mean you can't enjoy it and enjoy it for simplicity's sake.
Yeah, I love an interesting cocktail, but sometimes it's daunting. I love the Death & Co. book, but it's like, get a bottle of Ancho Reyes and then infuse it with like 2 Chipotles and 1 jalapeno, and then get this vodka and infuse it with chrysanthemum, and, find this totally obscure like herbal liqueur made in the Netherlands. And it can be a little much. I'm all for kind of brevity, like the 3-ingredient cocktail, and like, let's just do something like a Negroni, but maybe with a twist or something like that. How do you make it interesting?
Well, and play with your base spirits too. I had somebody once tell me, "Oh, well, you must be so offended when people take the spirits you make and they mix them in a cocktail." I'm like, "Oh God, no, not at all. I'm never offended by that." Like, for me and for 10th Ward, our idea has always been, we're going to create a spirit that can be enjoyed by itself neat, or mixed in with a cocktail, because that's how 99% probably of the people enjoy it, is mixed within a cocktail. And so I always tell people, I said, you don't even have to, if you want to switch up a traditional Negroni, you don't even have to switch out ingredients. Just choose your different base spirits. A Negroni that's made with 10th Ward Genever and Dolan Sweet Vermouth is going to taste different than a Negroni made with McClintock Forager Gin and a Carpano. I mean, you're going to get 2 distinctly different drinks if you switch out the brands you use, because there's also been this increase in focus of uniqueness of the brand. And so that's what I always encourage people to do as well, is if you want to switch up something that's a favorite, switch out one of the spirit brands that you use, and you're going to get a completely different cocktail without having to learn a brand new recipe.
Yeah, I make Boulevardiers with the caraway
oh my
of
God,
yours.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah. Actually, there's a YouTube video for it, so you can check it out. It's one of my
I will be looking for that.
It's one of my few YouTube videos. So, I thought that was an interesting twist on a traditional cocktail, because the caraway adds such a nuanced,
kind of like that aquavit
note.
note.
I love aquavit, so
Me too.
It's one of my favorites.
We just had a journalist in the other day doing some research on rye whiskey, and so I sat him down and did a full tasting of all of our rye-based spirits, and the caraway rye, he goes, "I can't tell you if this is good or not because I hate aquavit." I said, "But it tastes like aquavit." He goes, "It tastes like aquavit and I hate it." Cool.
And what are your thoughts on white whiskey? Because I think it's so hard to drink, to mix. I understand the hook of, I just opened a distillery, I can't wait 5 years, so I need to sell something. But so many people are selling white whiskeys that are just not good, in my opinion.
I'm torn. Coming from bartending background into distilling, I think that there is worth to just about every single spirit out there. But I think that's part of the problem is there are people who make their white whiskeys with the intention that they'll sell the white whiskey until the aged stuff is ready to release. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people don't take the time, or maybe they just don't realize that the new make that you make to go into a barrel should be different than what you're going to put into a bottle to sell if you're trying to sell it as a standalone spirit. And what I mean by that is, so at 10th Ward, we have 2 new make whiskey products. We have our smoked corn whiskey and we have our caraway rye. And those 2 are actually distilled differently than the bourbon that goes into a barrel and the rye that goes into a barrel. And without going like too far into the technicalities of distillation practice, a lot of it has to do with how we make what we call our cuts. So the heart of the spirit is what we want. If you make a wide cut, it means you're leaving some congeners and some flavors and some funkiness in there that you wouldn't want if someone is tasting the spirit white. So for us, our smoked corn whiskey and our caraway rye are distilled across more copper and with much narrower hearts cuts into it because we want a cleaner, brighter tasting spirit, whereas stuff that's going to go into a barrel, we do wider cuts and we let in the first part, a little bit of the first part, which are called heads, and a little bit of the back part, which are called tails, because what tastes like a flaw in a new make whiskey is going to evolve over time in the barrel into a desirable trait. That being said, I think you've seen the end of the run of the white spirits. Well, not the white spirits, but specifically new make whiskeys and like moonshines and unaged bourbons. I stand by our two. I think they're delicious. We actually had a liquor store manager down in DC the other day tell us, he's like, well, I love both of your white whiskeys, but I'm not going to carry them because it requires someone to stand there and taste them. And it's like, if I taste these as they are, I can tell, yes, this is amazing. But because there have been so many poorly made white whiskeys out on the market, as in general, I think you're seeing the decline of that.
Well, that's why I thought the caraway was so ingenious, because it was a way of using essentially like a white whiskey, but giving it some flavor where it wasn't just that traditional kind of like moonshine-esque flavor. Like you created a spirit that tasted like an akavit or something, and it wasn't just like, oh, they had to do something and put something on the shelf, so they made a white whiskey that wasn't good. So I really enjoyed that, because that was one of the first spirits you guys had out, and I'm still a fan of the caraway.
Well, and that goes to the credit of, again, our founder, Monica. Monica is very, very savvy and very good at, taking that thoughtful approach to anything that may go out into the market. And I'll tell you, like, that's a big chunk of what she and I do is spend time going, okay, we really want to make this product. Is there a market for it? If there is, how can we get into it? If there's not, how can we take this general idea and tweak it so we can find a placeholder for it?
So what's next for you guys? Anything you want to talk about?
The big thing is definitely going to be more barrel-aged spirits. Heading into 2020, we're putting a lot more of our smoked bourbon down onto oak. We're also putting down more of what we call our stouted rye onto oak. And even then, with those unique things, like you say, everybody's got a bourbon, everyone's got a rye. With our bourbon, the corn itself is smoked. And so as a new make spirit, it has this very distinct, almost mezcal-like note to it. For those of people who are big into smoked spirits, iodine is one of the big notes on the new make. It's like Lefroy tends to have a big, heavy, almost like a Band-Aid-like flavor to it. And as we've been putting some of that bourbon down onto oak, again, talking about those chemical reactions, it's kind of wonderful because a lot of that really heavy, bitey iodine, as it sits on oak and matures, that starts to pull back, and what originally kind of tasted like iodine now starts to taste like honey. And so it develops, you still have this really big, bold campfire-like note to it, but then it sweetens and it softens, and that sweetness of the corn in the mash bill starts to move forward. And then with our stouted rye, we create a Maryland-style rye, which means it's low rye, high barley. That ages on New American White Oak, but then we finish it in Gonzo Imperial Porter barrels.
I think I had one that was finished in an Old Mother barrel.
Yes, that was our first run from a couple of years ago.
I don't think I have any of that one left.
Yeah. And it just, so it creates this softer, more nuanced kind of maltier. And that's another way, again, we work with local breweries that we have an agreement with Flying Dog that as they work on there and harvest their Gonzo Imperial barrel-aged barrels, we'll take those and we'll finish our rye in them. So there's the big things. And then, of course, we always encourage people to come out and join the club because we have what we call our bottle club, and every single quarter you get a brand new release that you exclusively get. The public never gets it. And that's a nice way for me to flex my creative muscles. And I basically get to go to Monica and be like, this is what I want to make. So like for our quarter 2 release, it's actually going to be what we're calling the Conservation Cordial. And it started out of this idea of wanting to harvest watershed native plants to make a liqueur. But the more research I did, like a lot of native watershed plants and botanicals are now threatened because of overharvesting. And so what we've done is we've actually worked together with Foxhaven here in Frederick County to develop a list of edible invasive species. And so we're actually harvesting invasive species to use in this, what we call our conservation cordial, so that you're helping the watershed by drinking the invasive plants.
Yeah, that's a nice way to flip it. That's really awesome. I had a question about the what was it, a Maryland rye?
Oh yeah, the Maryland style rye.
Was that a thing like
Yes.
a long time ago, or is that fairly
yes.
new?
No,
I'd
so
like to hear about that.
Yeah, so the history nerd in me will come out. So yeah, so if you actually look down at the history of distilling within the United States, obviously it comes in during colonial times and like pre-colonial. For a long time, it was apple brandy because of the prevalence of the apples that colonists were growing and harvesting. But particularly within Pennsylvania and Maryland, you started to see an increase of rye whiskey production. That was mostly because it is a massive pain in the ass to prep apples and fruits in general for fermentation and distillation. Grain was a lot easier. You had you didn't have to worry about infection as much. You tended to have a much higher yield. And so almost contiguous, or at the same time, you would see growth of the Pennsylvania style and the growth of the Maryland style. Pennsylvania style tends to be a little bit spicier, tends to utilize specific to Pennsylvania rye cultivars. But in Maryland, you tended to see a much softer, much more nuanced. When I say nuanced, I just mean not a big, bold, like black pepper note. So Maryland rye, there's actually a lot of disagreement, because of course we didn't take great notes back then, and most of the whiskey production was taking place on an individual farm level as opposed to a massive industrial style level. Some people will tell you Maryland rye is a little bit softer and sweeter because it had a higher corn content, because more corn was being grown. But we tend to, and I say we, I say me, I personally tend to subscribe to the idea that the Maryland rye was much more barley heavy. Because if you look at the historic notes, corn was mostly being grown even further south than Maryland. When you get down into like Virginia and Kentucky, and then a little bit further west, as like you're getting into Ohio and Tennessee and those areas. And so if you're looking at like a traditional Maryland rye, again, lower on the rye content, higher on the barley, higher on the corn. And what that does is that creates a sweeter version. A lot of people tend to think of rye as this very black pepper, very hot, very spicy spirit, and that's the rye itself. Midwestern rye, which is probably what most people have had, tends to be like 95% rye, and then either 5% corn or 5% barley. So with ours, it's 70% rye and then 30% barley. And the reason we like to do that is malted barley has this very chocolatey, just lovely tannic quality to it. And so, yeah, and again, like what we like to do is we love to look at the history of it and go, okay, let's dig down deep into the history of Maryland rye. Cool, here's this great history. Here's people who knew what they were doing and figured shit out so we don't have to do it. Now, how do we do it a little bit different? Which is why we ended up finishing it in the porter barrels.
That is awesome. Thank you for the history lesson.
Yeah.
I was really curious about that because I didn't know Maryland had a specific type of rye.
You're seeing an increase in it too. Obviously, us being a Maryland distillery, we want to like focus on that. But I had mentioned Todd Leopold earlier. He at Leopold Brothers in Denver, they make a Maryland style rye. And following, again, those old school directions of lower rye, higher adjunct of some sort. And he also subscribes to the higher barley content. So yeah, I think you'll see more and more of that, too, of people recognizing the difference between the three big states were New York, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. In fact, internally, the New York Distillers Guild has set what they call Empire Rye standards, which means it can only be rye that was grown within New York. It has to be distilled in New York by a single distillery in a single season. And I think I'd love to see more of those kind of designations coming out too. That if you're going to slap a label on it, say this is a Maryland style rye or an Empire style rye, here's how you have to produce it.
That's really cool. I just have one more thing I wanted to ask before we get into the on the fly round, which I might switch up a little for you because you're a distiller and not a chef. Well, maybe you are a chef too. I don't know.
Just a home chef.
Cool. But I'm kind of curious about, like a lot of people talk about in Frederick, the like cannibalism of all the breweries and the growing number of distilleries, and there's even a growing number of vineyards out here. And I think that when people say things like that, they're specifically talking about like patronage at a brewery.
Right.
And they're not thinking about like distribution, which is kind of like a thought that I just kind of had today. I've been thinking about the whole cannibalization thing for a while, because it's like, okay, how many breweries are we going to have until it gets to be too much? But then I realized something as we were talking today, where it's like, well, there's other outlets other than just having people come in. Like I did a birthday party at a brewery down in Howard County, I think, close by, Manor Hill Brewery.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
From the looks of their place, they can't fit a lot of people in their tap room, but they had tons of kegs and pallets and pallets and pallets of just like empty cans. Like obviously their distribution is huge there. So do you see that being a thing kind of in Frederick as we move forward with all these like new businesses popping up?
There's a definite danger of that. I mean, honestly, looking at the explosion of craft distilleries, not just within, say, like Frederick County, but nationwide, I have a feeling, and I hope I'm wrong, but I have a feeling distilling is going to hit a similar state that craft brewing did in the mid-90s, when you saw that bubble burst. And there is a limited number of customers. I mean, and that is definitely one of the challenges. And so I think Frederick has the advantage that we are close enough to two major metros. We're close to Baltimore, we're close to DC, that I know we pull people in. But they're also seeing similar things. They're seeing an increase in breweries opening and vineyards and distilleries. And then distribution is its whole other bag of worms. And it's been interesting to watch how different craft beverage producers kind of anticipate the changing of the industry. I personally know several breweries, not here in Frederick, but back from my hometown in Kansas, that actually reversed and went from a distribution model to a exclusively taproom model. That they're not going to try and get their kegs out. They're not trying to get bottles or cans on shelves. It is a 100% you have to come to us, and you go deep as opposed to going wide. And I think that's kind of at a point where we are in distilling as well, that we kind of have to look at how do we plan on developing our business strategy? Do we focus on making it an event? You have to come in, but you get this amazing experience. Spirits are a little bit different because spirits tend to thrive more on distribution, getting behind bars, getting in with bartenders, things like that. So, I mean, I feel like that's not a super specific answer. That's very general, but it's something that if you're paying attention to the industry, you need to be paying attention to. Frederick County has done a wonderful job of making Frederick County attractive to craft producers. But on the other hand of that, you have to keep a look on it. Are we doing enough to differentiate ourselves as continuing distilleries come in and breweries come in, and what's their hook? What's their unique thing that they're going to do to encourage people? And what should we do to make sure that we stay unique and attractive to consumers in the region?
And how important is it to get behind bars in both Baltimore and DC? In the craft spirits world, you have things like brand ambassadors who are hired, on the national level and global level to go around and push their spirits because there's so many out there. So, what are you guys looking at? Is anyone going into DC bars or Baltimore bars and saying, here, try our stuff. We'd love to have you pouring 10th Ward spirits.
So we're lucky enough that we've got an absolutely amazing salesperson, Christine. She is brilliant. She's a former bartender from here in Frederick, and she knows the product front and back, knows how to mix it, and so she's absolutely killer. But then we've also gone in with our distributor. And our distributor has some really talented salespeople as well. And so, of course, they, pay visits and things like that. But, for us, it's also a lot of developing those relationships. You talk about ambassadors, that like the big thing that helps is if you can find somebody in the industry and in the region that you want to be in who is a true believer in your product, is a person that is like, yes, I love this. This is what I want to mix with. And if you can get them on board with you, that makes your job a lot easier. And that's why it also pays to do things like stay involved with the bartending guilds. And for us, as small as we are, it would be amazing to be able to like create, we're going to have a global ambassador. But for us, it's finding bartenders and sales reps that love our product and believe in what we do, and then giving them the tools to help sell it. And then also being involved, like I say, with the community. And if you give to them, they give back to you. And so I know Christine and Monica are in the process of working on developing a ambassador program so that as our reach expands, finding these people that are willing to like go to bat for us, and then again, helping train them and give them the tools that they need to do it effectively.
Cool.
Plus, every once in a while, I will go out to different bars and do like distillery talks and trainings and things like that. So lets me get out of my cave every once in a while.
How far does 10th Ward reach?
Right now, we're across all of Maryland and in the district. We've had some offers to be in some surrounding states, and even actually got approached for some Midwest and West Coast. We have not done those, though, mostly because we want to make sure that we're being thoughtful with our growth, and that we are fulfilling and maintaining the quality levels for the people who've been supporting us from the beginning, and the people that are the closest to us. We've seen things like Death's Door Distillery ended up having to go for auction a couple of months ago. And, they were one of the fastest growing craft brands in the U.S. And one thing that broke my heart, there was a brewery in Kansas called Tallgrass that made absolutely amazing beer, and they grew a little too fast and just couldn't keep up. So like they weren't even fulfilling, like their orders didn't keep up with the growth they had done. And unfortunately they had to shut down. And so that's one thing that we want to be cognizant of as well, is obviously world-class spirits, but also making sure that we maintain that and that we don't grow too fast, because it's an easy temptation to fall into when you have high demand and you have people coming to you. As they say, you never meet a paycheck you didn't like, but sometimes you have to be thoughtful about it and be like, well, if we do agree to this, can we actually keep up with it?
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully I can keep up with all my pizza orders. All right, we're back with On the Fly Distiller version.
Sweet.
Usually we ask about kitchens and chefs and stuff, but I'm going to switch it up for you.
Awesome.
Because we probably have some distiller and spirit people listening that might be interested in what you have to say about that rather than the kitchen. So, on the fly, what's your favorite tool in the distillery?
Oh, God, in the distillery? Probably my whiskey thief. Sometimes called a wine thief. It is, if you're ever a kid and you remember like when you would get your pop or your chocolate milk and you would put your straw in and you put your thumb over the straw and pull it out and like drink it like that. That's essentially what the whiskey thief is. Basically, we're just utilizing super basic physics to pull samples from the barrels to check on them. And yeah, it's such a cool, visceral, like hand-done thing in an industry that is this brilliant amalgamation of old school techniques and new school techniques. And plus ours is 100% made of copper. So anytime, like being a former theater guy, it makes me feel like a distiller, like the character of the distiller. Oh, let's check the whiskey.
Nice. Who's your favorite distiller?
That's tough. Can I do like a three-way tie?
Yeah.
Of like the three people that have been amazing enough to mentor me and also make absolutely brilliant spirits would be Maggie Campbell at Privateer Rum up in Ipswich, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. She's the one that encouraged me to get into the industry and has been just an absolutely brilliant mentor and makes the best rum hands down that's being made in the U.S. right now. Another would be Todd Leopold Brothers out in Colorado. Same thing, making amazing cordials and whiskeys. Then the other would probably be Paul Hletko at Few in Evanstown, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. Another one, just people who didn't have to take the time for some jerk little kid who just got into the industry and wanted to learn, and 3 titans within our industry but gave up their time to teach me, because one, they're making amazing spirits in and of their own, but they've also just been amazing inspirations and mentors. So I'd call that a 3-way tie between those guys. And I'm sure I'm forgetting plenty of other people, because again, it is such a community driven industry that it's almost impossible, but those would definitely be the 3 that come right to mind.
Nice. Art or science?
Both. Okay, so I have a Bachelor of Science, but I love art. So
Got it.
Kind of like we talked about, distillation in my mind is that brilliant marriage of the two. It is science to be consistent, to make sure you have the same product time after time, and to make it replicable, but the art side, because every distiller brings in something unique to what they're doing. So
Yeah.
push come to shove, I'm a theater nerd. I really like art.
I think we all lean some way, probably. You get a ticket to go anywhere in the world on, it's usually a food tour, but right now it's going to be a spirit tour. Where is it?
Ireland. That's been on my wife and I's, I should say Ireland and Scotland. It's been on our bucket list for a while. The original plan was when our son turned 21, we were going to go. Then ironically, being the son of a distiller and a big foodie like my wife, he's not super into drinking. And so he didn't seem super keen on going on a distillery tour, but just obviously having a soft spot for Scotch whiskeys and Irish whiskeys, plus having now friends in both of those areas, would love to go there and just hit up all the new, upcoming, and of course old classic distilleries would be amazing.
Nice. What would you say is your greatest strength?
Oh God. I like to think I'm open-minded. I'd say that's a good strength in terms of distillation. One of the hardest lessons I ever had to learn as a journalist, and then as someone going into PR, was admitting when you don't know. I will admit I got put into a management position way too early as a young professional. And for some reason, I felt like knowing everything and being right all the time was how you came across as a powerful, knowledgeable person. Then I realized that just makes you look like an asshole. And so I've tried to become much better about admitting when I don't know something, and then taking that extra time to figure out how to learn it, or if nothing else, lean on the person that knows that. And I think more than any knowledge I may have, more than any experience I may have, that ability to go, wow, I am way out of my depth, let's lean on experts, has benefited me the most.
Nice. What do you think you need the most help with?
Organization. Jesus. Monica can tell you that. My wife can tell you that. I am infinitely better than I used to be. I am not even trying to make light of it. I am legitimately convinced that I have at least some form of adult ADHD. I know I have anxiety and depression, and I'm on medication for that, but I think the ADHD, and especially that form where you get super obsessed with something and then you focus on nothing else but it, to the detriment of everything else. Writing shit down and making sure that I'm being thoughtful has been better. But yeah, that's definitely the thing that I've always got to work on. And that can be harnessed for good, but especially when you are in a business that is dependent on thoughtful pre-planning, I could always use help with that.
Can you recommend a book to our guests?
Oh God, I could recommend countless books to your guests. So one
that you brought up already.
Yes. So one that we were talking a little bit about on the break, that whether you are a chef, whether you are a bartender, whether you are a distiller, brewer, or even if you just like doing all of those said things, but you do it at home, I cannot recommend the Neurogastronomy book. So it's Neurogastronomy, How the Brain Creates Flavor and Why It Matters, by Gordon M. Shepard. Absolutely brilliant book, incredibly dense, gets into the weeds a lot. The guy is an Ivy League neurologist, but he really gets into the nuts and bolts in how we perceive flavor, why we perceive flavor. And for me, really looking with deep dives into those ideas of how we perceive and why we perceive is tantamount to what we do, whether we're chefs, bartenders, or distillers. And so I would recommend going back to it a couple of times. Again, the first round through, I had my iPad next to me the entire time to Google specific terms, be like, I have no idea what the hell he's talking about. But that is definitely one. And I know like countless people have also recommended it on this podcast, but you cannot oversing the praises of the Flavor Bible enough. It is just a great resource for contrasting and comparative flavors. But yeah, if anybody is interested, they're welcome to reach out to me. I have well over 200 books focused around distilling, spirits, flavor, things like that. And I can tell you which ones to read and which ones to avoid, because there's also some garbage out there.
Nice. All right. So how do you decompress?
So two main things. Usually it's either playing video games. Right now, one of the best and worst decisions I ever made was to purchase a Nintendo Switch, because I can take games on the road with me now. The other is working on motorcycles. I've got a 1980 Honda CX500 Custom that I've restored, and I get to tinker around on that. And it's a great vintage bike for tooling around town. And the other way to decompress is also just cooking with my wife. She's an absolutely brilliant home chef, and talk about like knowledge of flavors and everything. But that's when I have free time. Other than that, that's pretty much what I do, is focused around distilling and occasionally bartending.
This one I'm going to keep the same. What's the best meal you've ever had?
Just last summer, my wife and I went up to New York to visit some friends of ours and hit up a bunch of Broadway shows, and they surprised us by getting us the chef's table at Gabriel Cruther. And it was my first time participating in a chef's table, which was amazing, being right there to the kitchen and being able to watch everything. But I will fully admit, we also drank quite a bit because we did the wine pairing and we had cocktails beforehand, but the food was brilliant. But talking kind of like we did on the break about everything surrounding it is also what made it amazing. You know, we were being able to watch some of the most brilliant chefs in New York do their thing. We were able to listen in on the kitchen chatter, but also with two amazing friends, and just course after course of perfectly crafted food. It was absolutely brilliant. Short of that, so that was absolutely amazing. We also did an amazing prefix at Le Bernardin 5 years previously, which I would spend that money in a heartbeat again. But after those, there is an amazing Mexican dish called Chili Colorado, which is beef in a slow-cooked red sauce. And my wife and I made that for my 29th birthday. And I still hold that up as one of the best meals I've ever had.
All right, and the last question is not really on the fly question. It's kind of a long question, but what do you want to be remembered for? Actually, it can be really fast. Some people answer it in one word. So, Kathy said pies.
I was gonna say, yeah. She was immediately in with pies. I just want to be remembered for not being an asshole.
That's a really good one.
I feel like I have two distinctive personalities. And 99% of the time, I feel like I'm pretty laid back and chill, and I try not to be a judgmental dude and try to be accessible and warm and friendly. But I also understand when I wrap myself up in, especially like my work and my passion for spirits and cocktails and everything in between, I can be dismissive and curt, and that's not what I want to be at the end of the day. And so I guess what I want to be remembered for, more than the spirits I make, more than cocktails or anything else, I just wanted to be like, yeah, no, Mark was genuinely a good dude. That would make me happy, I think, at the end of the day.
I think that's kind of what we all wanted at the heart of it, you know. Well, thank you for coming out. Thanks for the taste of stuff. It was really good. I appreciate you coming.
My pleasure. Anytime the chance to share stuff, and thank you guys for letting me come on. And like I say, nothing else. I know I can talk for a long time, but I do hope everyone enjoyed and everything, and would love for people to reach out and learn more about us and definitely reach out to you guys.
Let them know where they can reach out to you.
Yeah, definitely. So personally, if you're looking to connect with me, I'm on, of course, Facebook as Mark A. Vierthaler, but on Instagram and Twitter, I'm at Whiskey Icarus with no E. But if you also want to see like what 10th Ward is doing and kind of get like a bigger view of what the new things coming out from 10th Ward and our cocktail lab and things like that, everything is at 10th Ward Co. So yeah, whether you reach out to at 10th Ward Co. or at Whiskey Icarus, if nothing else, it'll get to me. I'm trying to be better about not being married to my phone, but I'm pretty easy to get a hold of.
All right, and I think everybody can figure out where to hit us up, but I'll say it anyway, Chefs Without Restaurants at Instagram and chefswithoutrestaurants@gmail.com if you have any questions, comments, suggestions. Leave a review, like the podcast, subscribe, all that good stuff. And that's pretty much all I got. We'll see you next time. Thank you. Peace. Love you. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. And if you're interested in being a guest on the show or sponsoring a show, please let us know. We can be reached at chefswithoutrestaurants@gmail.com. Thanks so much.